Welcome, everyone. My name is Ed Ramsey from DePaul University's Corporate and Employer Outreach Team. I want to thank you for joining us for the first installment of DePaul University's Generation AI, Conversations and Perspectives on Artificial Intelligence Programming. We welcome you to Practically Speaking, a look at how AI can practically be implemented in our everyday work by Professor James Moore. Just a couple things here. The session will be recorded and it'll be made accessible through DePaul's AI Institute site, and we'll drop the link in the chat. And also, too, if you would like to interact with Dr. Moore, definitely join us through the Q&A. The chat is disabled, but put in your questions, comments in the Q&A through our Zoom. Now, one of the things I wanted to let everybody know, we have a wonderful education benefits resource webpage. And, it's a really great resource for you to learn more about DePaul's personal educational benefits for employees, as well as employers. And it is designed to be a resource guide for managers and leaders who are looking for workplace solutions. So feel free. Definitely access this QR code on your phone to access our corporate partner website. And you know what we'll also do is drop a link in the chat if you'd like to bookmark it. Now, as an employee, you have access to educational benefits to help you grow, gain new skills, and advance your career. We want you to think of DePaul to definitely reach these goals. And you know what? Now that we're in the new year, this is the perfect time for you to think about your personal and professional goals. For instance, you may have a desire to go back to school, or your team members may want to learn new skills for career advancement. DePaul can get you there through its educational benefits, and we're happy to support you in any way. Definitely, the big thing about DePaul University is that from classes and certificates to full degrees at the graduate and undergraduate level, we have countless opportunities and programming. And speaking of programming, we definitely invite you to use this QR code right there on the right hand of the slide here to check your upcoming menu of events. Whether you're looking to finish your bachelor's degree or interested in joining our professional communications faculty for a night of networking, check out this website, check it out. We also have listings for our upcoming inclusion and benefits, or I should say inclusion and belonging series, and upcoming AR series to our calendar as well. You can see that Dr. Marty Martin will be presenting AI in an inclusive world, ensuring that we are all on the table. And that's something that Dr. Martin will be doing in April. Of course, we have Purpose and Impact in the Workplace by Dr. Veronica Appleton. And then we round things up with No Jerks Allowed, Building a Civilized and Inclusive Workplace Culture by Dr. Jacqueline Jensen. So check us out in April. And also, too, just as I mentioned, Generation AI, this is a wonderful series we'll be having throughout 2025 from April through November. Definitely access the code that you see there. We will be sending out information about these upcoming events. And by you attending today's event, you will automatically be invited to our future events. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Professor James Moore. James Moore is a professor of artificial intelligence and internet marketing and director of online learning for DePaul University's Driehaus College of Business. He has played a pivotal role in development and launch of the DePaul AI Institute, where he has advanced both the research and practical applications of artificial intelligence in business and digital marketing. Now, Professor Moore has received numerous accolades, including the prestigious Kellstadt Marketing Center Distinguished Professional Educator Award for Excellence in Teaching, which he has won twice. He has also earned the Schulo Best Distance Teaching Practice Award and contributed chapters on search engine optimization to the IMC, which happens to be Integrated Marketing Communication Handbook. Please join me in welcoming Professor Moore.
Hey, how are you? Can everyone hear me okay? I'm just going to share my slides. And off we go. Thank you so much, Ed. I hardly recognize myself there. So my name is James Moore, and we're going to be talking about practically speaking today. So we've got a fairly ambitious agenda for today. I'm going to move through things swiftly, but just so you know, the slides will be made available after today, along with a video recording. So let's start off with some quick introductions. My name is James Moore. You've got my contact information on screen. Telephone number. If you're wondering where the strange accent comes from, I am British. My hometowns are Bath and London, but I live in Chicago. And you have about a 1 in 1,000 chance of seeing my face on Crown Fountain in Millennium Park. I work as the Director of Online Learning for the College of Business, and I teach. So primarily my focus is on AI and internet marketing. And one of the things that I want my students to be is like a sommelier for AI, to understand the provenance of AI, its pairing and price. So as Ed mentioned, I work very closely with the DePaul AI Institute, and my focus there is on successfully integrating AI into our teaching at DePaul. And this happens through a couple of teaching symposiums. On screen, there's information about the AI Institute and our LinkedIn page. But let's jump into the material for today. So I've got 3 quotes that I want to use to sort of set the scene for today's conversation. The first is from Sam Altman, and this surfaced about a year ago. And it says 95% of what marketers use, agencies, strategists, and creative professionals for today will be easily, nearly instantly, and at almost no cost handled by the AI. So that's a provocative statement. And that sort of deeply resonates with incoming students who are at DePaul working out what their future is and how AI will impact that. Second quote is from the originator of the term artificial intelligence, John McCarthy. And he said, as soon as it works, no one calls it AI anymore. And you'll see that in your life. AI is this magical interface that does amazing things. Once you understand it, it doesn't feel like it's AI to you. So to that point, final quote, Arthur C. Clarke says, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So for many people, AI is magic. It does these incredible things. So let me share very quickly with you a free way to leverage this AI magic. So I use AI on a daily basis, and I'm evaluating tools, looking to see what works best for my own personal use, my work use, the colleagues I work with, the students I teach. So one free tool that I would highly recommend is Notebook LM. Now we know that generative AI hallucinates, and hallucinations are essentially one of 2 things, making things up or getting things wrong. So the primary focus for anyone who's working with generative AI is to look to reduce those hallucinations. Now there are a series of ways that we can do that. And some of them sort of involve putting more context into the window as we operate with AI, or using search to sort of direct our results. But there are 2 methods that are particularly useful. The first is an ugly acronym called Retrieval Augmented Generation, otherwise known as RAG. And the second one is injecting as much information into a thing called the context window. So the context window is essentially working memory for AI. So going back to that concept of being a sommelier for AI and understanding what's most appropriate, different AI systems have different sizes of working memory. So Notebook LM is able to provide one of the largest working memory sizes. And with that combination of RAG, it can vastly reduce hallucinations. So RAG is essentially providing a series of documents which are verified to the AI that it looks through first when it answers a question. And this is a key way that we can use AI to provide more accurate results. With RAG, these documents are converted to a vector database that the large language model has access to. So Notebook LM, as I said, is a free service that has a large working memory and has the ability for you to upload documents to constrain your analysis and research. It is available at notebooklm.google.com, and you can sign in with a Gmail address to use the service. So here's how it could be used. You can upload up to 50 large documents per notebook on this service. And then that gives you the opportunity to interrogate the data. You can look in there, you can ask questions of the large language model, which is using that data exclusively. Then it will format templated outputs to you, briefing documents, frequently asked questions, learning guides. And then lastly, it also creates a podcast. This, to some, may not be the most practical use, but I found it to be extremely helpful. The fundamentally ironic sort of part of this process is this podcast creation will create a thing called speech disfluencies. So the podcast has two artificial intelligent hosts, and they'll inject ums and ers and banter into the recording to sound more natural. And what I've noticed from the folks that I work with, when they record podcasts, they're removing those elements. They're deleting the ums and ers to sound more professional. But here's a practical use of this particular tool. So a couple of months ago, I was asked to give a presentation to a group called the Broadway League. I was aware of them, but I didn't have a deep understanding of what they did, their history. So through the use of a simple tool, Adobe Acrobat, I was able to visit their website and download every single page on that website to a file. So this is just a one click of the button to do this. It churned away for about 4 to 5 hours and created a PDF that had 371 pages. So a fairly large file, but basically everything that was publicly available about this particular organization. I then uploaded this to Notebook LM. It gave me a podcast, and the podcast sort of sounded pretty interesting. It was something that I could listen to on my drive to work.
Another deep dive with us. Today
I'll just give you a taste of this.
That is near and dear to my heart, Broadway. But we're not just talking about the shows or the performers we see on stage. This is going to be a deep dive into...
So what that did is it gave me a 30-minute podcast with two presenters encapsulating the history of the organization, their needs, their wants, various things that they'd done in the past that were of significance. And this gave me an overview of how the organization operated. So I was able to sort of understand them better. And then with that in place, I'm able to interrogate the large language model. I'm able to ask it specific, detailed questions that would be useful to me in my presentation, my understanding of what they need and how they operated. So I think this is a really useful tool to provide an understanding of publicly accessible websites and organizations or things that have published documents to the web. Routinely,
I'm sorry, Professor Moore.
Please,
you mind if I jump in? Yes,
of course.
My mind is obviously extremely blown away about your documents can be transformed into a podcast, which is something that's really interesting. Also, too, had a couple comments regarding Notebook LM. This person mentioned that you can enter in a YouTube link and it'll give you notes to answer any question on any topic and however you decide to ask it. And also someone had a question or kind of a comment, really. It would be, he said at one point or at some point, it'd be good to talk about the balance of uploading using confidential information in AI, because of course you wouldn't want these the confidentiality breached if you're doing training and things like that. So I don't know if that's something you want to jump into now, or you have that later on.
Yeah, we'll jump into it. Definitely, that's a great observation. So my view on this historically has been anything you publish to the web has to be something that you feel comfortable with being on the web. Now, this particular service from Google says in its terms and conditions that the information you put into the system won't be used for training the models. And they've said that they won't look at the data that you're providing. That being said, because this is a free service, I don't feel comfortable about uploading confidential documents for this particular product. If I have confidential documents that I want to use a large language model to interrogate, there are two methods that I will use. The first one is to use a paid service with encryption and very explicit terms and conditions. And the second is to use a local large language model. So we'll come back to those concepts later today, but that's a great observation from the audience. So primarily, I'm using this tool for information that's being made publicly available. So PDFs that are published to the web, websites, but I'm not putting anything that's private, privileged, or restricted in any format for this particular service. And as the other participant said, this can also link to YouTube videos, and it will analyze the transcripts from those videos. So it's an amazing service. So I use it in my teaching. So for all of the documents that I'm sharing with my students, I'm uploading it to the system here, and I'm using this as a method to find the narrative that weaves these various articles, resources together to understand things in a deep way. And I believe in multimodal learning. So the ability to create a podcast allows me to listen on my commute to work or at the weekend to understand things from a different perspective. So it's a particularly powerful tool. And as I say, the reason why I recommend this tool is there are competing services that limit the number of documents that you can upload and limit the working memory. So this particular product excels in those two key aspects. So as I say, it's something that I would highly recommend folks today watching at least play around with. So to that point, the other thing that I try and sort of share with my students is the concept of environmental awareness. We said that I want them to be like a sommelier for AI, to understand, pairing, price, and provenance. To that point, we have the concepts of foundation and frontier. So within the field of generative AI, these are two terms that are commonly applied. Foundation means that the AI service is developed for downstream uses. It's something that is available in other products. So let's say you're using Grammarly. Grammarly will have GPT as the backend service. So that's an example of a foundation model. And frontier are the cutting edge models, the models that are able to do things that are truly magic. So from a US perspective, there are about 6 cloud frontier large language models that are available for use. And we see these on the screen. They have different affordances. They have different costs. They have things that are particular to them. So in terms of environmental awareness, my recommendation for today is to understand at least what these models can do and how their affordances distinguish themselves from each other. And then in China, we have 3 frontier models. So DeepSeek is probably the one that resonates with most of the audience today because it's been featured in the media frequently. But there are other ones that exist. And then in Europe, we've got a smaller selection of frontier models. So we have Mistral, which comes out of the European Union, primarily France. So the situation I see many sort of organizations facing is this concept of comparison shopping. They understand that they will need to use generative AI, a large language model. How is it then that they decide what is the best model to use? So if you think back in history, quite often when we made sort of consumer decisions, we would look at magazines like Which, or we would go to the web to see how various sort of products and services were rated. And at the moment, that might seem a little bit intimidating to most of us. So luckily, there are some valid resources that give us signals as to what might be the most appropriate product or service to think about using. So let's go through some of those sites. The first one's called Chatbot Arena. And what this does is it provides a basic evaluation and comparison of models, which then exist on a leaderboard. So this gives you an understanding of what might be the most cutting edge of the models available to you that particular day, that particular week. And the ranking will change. So at the moment, Elon Musk has an AI large language model called Grok 3 that arrived about a week ago. And that's ranking around 1 or 2 on this leaderboard. But that will change. Newer models will be released. Things will change. And then we've got the concept of holistic evaluation. So just because a model is powerful doesn't mean it's necessarily the right model for you. We want to use something that is congruent with your values. So here, this particular model is looking to see if there are safety issues. So again, going back to Grok 3, a very powerful model, but considerable safety issues with use. So perhaps not the right model for many organizations. And then if we want to really think about the capabilities of these systems, we're looking for multiple ways that they are tested in terms of their abilities. So a recent evaluation model is Humanity's Last Exam, which has 3,000 multiple choice questions, which have been created by subject matter experts to deeply test the fundamental understanding of a large language model. So if we look at the results here, we'll see that many of the sort of productive, powerful, cutting edge models are scoring maybe 10 to 20%. And then lastly, we want to think about provenance. So one of the negatives to these large language models is that they've been trained on copyrighted information or information that shouldn't have been part of their training set. Transparency, indicating where their learning models came from, gives us an understanding of what might be the safest model to utilize. So again, the Foundation Model Transparency Index gives us an idea of what might be the best model for us. So Ed, I think you may have a question for me.
Yes, it's blowing up here. Here's a great question about costs. Now, when talking about costs, is discussion about, like, for instance, the huge increases in energy and environmental costs of using AI generally included?
So that is a great question. So at the moment within the US, about 2 to 3% of energy consumption comes from data use. So cloud services, AI services, and that number is starting to scale up. So Microsoft has started to look towards investing in nuclear power to sort of deal with those rising costs. I think some of this discussion is perhaps slightly misdirected because there is larger sort of energy consumption from what we may consider sort of more trivial uses. So, farming, for example, or people making changes to their houses. So if you think about your bathroom or kitchen being redeveloped, that creates a significant carbon offset. But that's a right question to ask. There are two perspectives here. One perspective is that the AI systems will develop new ways to provide more efficiency. I don't know if that's true or not, but we are seeing that as a signal at the moment. And there are methods that we can use to sort of reduce use of the system. The second part of that is the concentration of these systems. And that, I think, is a larger problem, where these systems will need to use water, and we'll see that competing with human use. So some cities may see increased cost to provide water to their citizens. I must admit, I don't know how it's going to play out, but my personal feeling at the moment is this particular observation perhaps pales in significance to other energy use within the US. So
if I can, thank you. And if I can maybe
Please.
just ask a couple more questions. Does AI use its own answers as data to pull from?
Great question. So typically when AI is providing an answer, it's not going to send that back into its knowledge base, but it will look at how that answer was used or appreciated by the human. So there's a thing called a feedback mechanism. So quite often these systems are looking to see if the answer they provided meted the needs of the user. If it isn't, that's a signal that goes back to say, improve the training, be aware of this thing isn't working. Longer term, it could be that some of those answers are used for other forms of training, but typically not at the moment. So
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, and then one more here.
Please.
Let's see. Can Notebook LM analyze a website directly, or do you have to dump it all into a PDF first?
Great question. So Notebook LM, if you provide it a web address, will just look at information from that one page that's part of the URL. You have to download something. So you could do that in multiple ways. I used Adobe Acrobat, but there's web scraping software that would allow you to download the totality of a website. So be aware, if you did give a URL to Notebook LM, it's looking at that as a historical document. So if that were to change, it would not be aware of that unless you initiated a change. So in a similar way, in terms of understanding the environment, there are other generative AI tools. For example, things that make images and video. So, following this analogy, thinking about the right pairing for you or your organization, my base recommendation to everyone today is, if you have a company, if you have an organization, you need to provide your house red, your base AI to everyone in the organization. So think of this as your default AI. It has to be something that provides a degree of security. So whatever your employees, your colleagues do on the system is not used to train models, but it has to be there. So here at DePaul, we're using Microsoft Copilot with enterprise data protection. That's available to every student, every staff member, every professor. So if they want to use AI, we have a version that's freely available, no cost, and that's secure. Because if you don't do this, your employees, your colleagues, they're going to go out and they're going to use what's available to them, which may not be the best option. Scaling up, you want to provide what I call task-appropriate AI for employees or colleagues who have a particular need that the default does not provide for. So that's the base thing. If there's one thing that you're getting out of today, that's the thing I would highly recommend. So how do we then move from theoretical knowledge to practical experience? My contention is AI is so important. I would want in any organization, all of my employees, all of my colleagues to have practical experience of AI. So we need a framework for this. So there's multiple steps that we can work through. The first one is coming up with an AI policy. And that has to be something that's simple, short, and grounded in the mission and strategy of the enterprise. Don't worry if you don't get everything right the first time, because this is something that will be revised. And here's the process for creating revisions. We need to educate everyone in the organization about AI. AI is hugely transformative, and it's something that everyone needs to have a base understanding of. So here's one way to approach this. Finland, back in 2018, released a MOOC. So a MOOC is a massive online open course. So it's online learning that's provided free of charge. So Finland did this back in 2018 with the assumption that AI was the future, and they needed to provide retooling for all of their citizens, a way that they could embrace change, understand change, be able to be ready for transformation. So they released 3 of these MOOCs. The first one introduces AI, provides a foundation. This is something that you could complete in a weekend or perhaps a week. There's a second MOOC which talks about how to build upon AI, how to integrate this into the enterprise. And then the third one touches on the ethics of artificial intelligence, where it may be harmful, where we need to understand provenance, where we can sort of deal with difficult situations. So my argument to the audience today is, if you are serious about AI, this is something that you would expect every employee within the organization to take. It's free of charge. You can get through each of these courses in a weekend, but I would set a goal and perhaps use badging or recognition to make sure that everyone goes through this, to have this understanding. And realize, of course, that Chicago has a number of conveniently located universities who also provide online learning and flex modalities too. So I'm going to pause for a second. It looks like Ed has another comment to share.
I got about 3 good questions here for you. Let's start with, how do we, and you might be covering this later, but let's see if we can jump on this right now. How do we protect ourselves against bias using AI?
That is a great question. And I'll be honest, the answer, when I cover this, we typically spend an hour to two on this because there are multiple biases to be aware of. The first one is the training set. The information that all of these systems have is fundamentally biased because it doesn't represent democratically all of the inhabitants around the world or in a particular region. And typically it's biased towards white males. It's not going to represent sort of the totality of the population within the US. The other thing to be aware of is typically the people who've created these systems have, a fixed worldview, which again isn't representative of the world. There are certain large language model providers that are aware of this and try to work around this. So if we go back to that list of providers that I mentioned earlier, one of them was a company called Anthropic, which has a product called Claude. The people who set up that company were primarily OpenAI employees who wanted generative AI to be available to the masses. They wanted to move towards a concept where AI was available to all, but they felt that OpenAI was not considering safety and ethics to the point that they should have. So they formed their own company. So I don't want to particularly sort of focus on one large language model and say that's the one to use. But for some, that consideration about safety, that consideration about bias may sort of move you towards considering Claude as your model of choice. Each of these models is aware that their data is biased in some respect, and they typically have a thing called a system prompt, which is designed to override some of those biases. But this is a tool that doesn't work accurately. The critical issue is making sure that the training set is sort of combed to identify biases and those biases removed. And that's where that transparency index, I think, is fundamentally important. There's going to be pressure, I think, on these companies to provide more transparency about their training data, their training sets. And that's where we can start to think about bias. This is a great question. It's something that we do deserve to spend more time on, but given the limitations for today, I think I'll sort of end here.
Right. And couple quick ones here. How do you handle security for data that is not open source when using proprietary sources?
That is a great question. So one of the ways that a lot of companies approach that is to do away with using web as the primarily interface for the large language model. There's a thing called an API, an application programming interface. And what that does is it allows you to send encrypted data to the service, and then that service sends data back to you. So for a lot of organizations, that's the first thing you do, because that provides a high degree of security. The communication, as I said, is encrypted, and the terms and conditions for APIs are typically more stringent than they are for web services. So that's one level. The second level is to think about moving these services into your own sort of enterprise or domain. So one way of approaching this would be to use Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure to contain an instance of a large language model that's essentially within your organization, encrypted, available only to you and your employees. Third one is, we'll cover this later today, it's possible to run an open source large language model on your own device. So I'm using a MacBook Air to present today. I'm running about 7 large language models on my device, albeit slowly, but we'll cover that in a sec. So anyway, thinking about this framework, step 3, I think, is the most important, and that's providing learning communities within your organization. Ideally, these are cross-functional teams, and you're mixing in levels of management. You don't want everyone from the same department at the same level. You want different perspectives from different parts of the organization. And what we're doing here is we're sharing discoveries and dangers. We're actively playing around with some of these systems and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Ideally, we're thinking about tasks that the organization needs to perform and whether you could bring AI to the table, whether AI could assist in that process and make you more accurate or more proficient. And then we look to see what's working, what isn't working. Are there gaps? Are there things that we want to be provided to us that are not yet part of our environment. And here, everyone has to have a voice. We want people sharing these things. We document, and then we share these findings with other communities within the organization. So that brings us to step 4. Here, we share, we understand the learning, and we revise the policies. And hopefully this is a continuous process, something that sort of goes on again and again. So Ed was kind enough to share a question from the organization today. So one of the participants said, will the facilitator be incorporating a message about the importance of team members who are using AI to make sure they are following their organization's policies regarding the use of it? So again, this is a deeply nuanced, important question that deserves, time to answer. So I'm going to give you the basics, although we could talk in more detail here. So really, we're getting down to a couple of factors here: incentives and economic choices. And if we look in the academic literature, there's a really good framework to think about this particular problem. It comes from the 1940s, and it's called Lewin's force field analysis. And basically it says within an organization, within a culture, there's a status quo. And there are forces either side of that. There are forces that are driving, that are trying to change the status quo. And then there are restraining forces, forces against that change. And the issue is, the harder you push, the stronger those forces push back against you. So the argument here from this analysis is the way that we make change is to remove or reduce the restraining forces. So essentially it's understanding why someone wouldn't want to do what you are suggesting, or what you're demanding, or what you have in your terms and conditions, your rules for the organization. So there's a great deal of research in this area. So one of the sources I look at is this management research, which is basically amalgamating all of the research from 1948 to 2007 that talks about this particular problem. And boiled down, it's essentially this quote: if perceived risks or costs outweigh benefits, change recipients will understandably tend to resist change. You have to give someone a reason to follow the change that you're looking them to make. So if we get back to this concept of we want people to follow the rules that we have as part of our AI policy, how do we do this? Well, the solution framework isn't complicated, but it does require a lot of hard work. And it gets down to communication. Essentially, we're stating the goals plainly. And we're saying that there will be some discomfort. Within an organization, you never want to say, do this because your life is going to be better. You typically want to say, do this because it's going to be better for the organization. There may be some pain, but ultimately this is necessary pain. And this is where the role of leadership kicks in. This is something that's part of the strategic charge, part of the mission. And you need to communicate down to everyone in the organization, this is the direction we're going. These are the things that we need to do. So as part of that, we have to listen. So we're surveying, we have meetings, we have meaningful engagement to understand why someone might not want to follow your AI policy, why there's a reason they want to work against this. So as part of this, we share accomplishments and pain points. We understand what's going on. And then we find advocates, people who understand and are able to sort of evangelize those changes within the organization. And again, reiterating this, we need to state our goals clearly. So many of the participants today have sort of quite rightly stated their concerns about security, privacy, ethics, and bias. But if you tell someone not to use something without the reason why, they're unlikely to follow your rules. So you have to articulate why there's a clear and current problem and how that problem may impact the individual within the organization. You then articulate that following these policies will fix the problems that the organization has, and maybe it may fix some of the problems that the individual has, but there's going to be costs, there's going to be adjustments, there's going to be milestones, there's going to be review. And as part of this, we need to review and audit the organization. So this is where, if you have an IS department, They're looking to find out what people are doing on the network, what services are being used, what devices people bring to the premises, and how those might be used. If you're providing devices to your employees, how have you locked them down for particular use? So going back to those cloud providers that we mentioned earlier, 5 of the ones that you saw on screen are open source. Open source means that these systems have been published in such a way that we can read and understand how they work, we can adapt them, and we can install them on our own hardware. So I mentioned earlier, I alluded to the fact that I had about 5 or 6 large language models running on my MacBook Air from 5 years ago. What I'd like the folks today to understand is, if this is of interest to you, you can grab your device and you can download these models to interact with on your own device. Or, as we've alluded to earlier, you can run these in the cloud, or you can run this on your own hardware within the organization. So NVIDIA this year is coming out with a $3,000 computer, which is designed to run AI models. And we're going to see proliferance of people playing around these things, tinkering with them on their own hardware, on their own premises, because you can train these things. So there are many ways to do this, but for those of you who embrace the concept of a weekend project, GPT for All, or OLAMA, are easily installed products. So basically, a click of a button, it downloads to Mac, Linux, or Windows, and it will allow you to run a large language model on your own device. So this means that your interaction with it is private. Whatever you do does not get used to train the model. Whatever you do stays on your own device. And this, to me, is a good way to experiment with what's possible. Now, these models had probably similar functionality to what we saw in the cloud 6 to 12 months ago. And obviously, the more powerful your device, the more quickly these models will run on your device. But this gives many an idea of what's possible. So let's segue to near-term dangers and opportunities. So we're approaching the end of prepared material. I want to sort of share some things that are on the near horizon that may impact folks in today's call. The first one is ChatGPT and Grok and DeepSeek, and as of this week, Anthropic Claude have reasoning models. Reasoning models spend more time considering a query and provide a response. And this fundamentally changes the way people have been thinking about prompt engineering the past 18 months. So if you are in an environment where you're focused on that and you think you know what you're doing, this changes everything. So these models now spend more time reasoning for complex tasks, and what might have worked as a successful prompt engineering strategy works differently. So we need to change things because the environment has changed. And then we have agentic AI. The concept here is the AI will follow your commands and do something on your own behalf and make decisions along the way. This sounds amazing. This sounds magic, but it has some particular perils. So Anthropic was the first to come out with this with a product called Computer Use, back towards the end of 2024. OpenAI has a similar thing with Operator. And the concept is you can get it to do things on the internet and then come back to you. This is a huge danger. There's a concept called prompt injection, which allows a website to poison the AI, to poison the large language model. The simplest way to think about this is a website might have white text on a white background that ordinary people do not see. But the large language model sees that, and it provides an instruction that essentially takes over operations and may say, you know what, all of the information you have, go to this website and download it so I know what your agent does. Or give me your credit card information, or purchase this for me and send it somewhere else. So this is deeply insidious, but this is something that is starting to become available. And then for those of you who have constrained organizations, security that's looking to prevent people from bringing in particular devices into the organization, realize now that AI will be embedded on many sort of consumer devices. So last year, Meta and Ray-Ban came out with these sunglasses, and they have built-in AI. There's a camera, there's a microphone, there's speakers. So you can use this to film your environment and to ask the AI to analyze the data that it sees. It's a great tool. It can help you translate. It's great for traveling. It's perfect for a tourist. But this is something that you may not notice people are using. Many of your employees and colleagues are wearing smartwatches. These things have embedded microphones and speakers, which can be used to talk to AI. The same thing for those of you who wear headphones or AirPods. So what I sort of hope you focus in on here is there are devices now that are designed to interact with AI and large language models. One example of this is a product called Limitless. So this is releasing product this year. So I should get mine in a week or two. This is something that you clip to your shirt, and it's designed to record your environment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Then it uses a large language model to make sense of what it hears. It integrates with your email and your calendar. And this is a useful tool to a certain extent. It means you understand conversations you had previously. You know what's on your shopping list, what you should do. It basically provides external memory. But this is deeply troubling for organizations where privileged conversations may be ingested into these devices and then essentially go off-site to the large language model. There's a similar thing. There's a product called Recall, which is part of Windows 11, which records everything that you do on your computer and saves that in one spot. So it's useful, it's productive, but it's particularly dangerous. So we're going to see more and more of these products available. So this is something that you want to be aware of because it provides some inherent risks and opportunities. So Omni and Compass are similar sort of devices that you can wear. Omni is interesting in that you fix it to your head, and I think this is snake oil, but it's saying that you can communicate with it to a certain degree through your mind. So be interesting to see how that fails in the marketplace. But the one that I think will succeed is out there already. It's called AI. This can be a wearable agent. So it has a battery that will last about 5 days. You wear it on your wrist like a Fitbit, and it's listening to everything that you do and trying to make sense of that. But it also has a version that I'm running on my Apple Watch. So I've got it turned off at the moment. But if I were to turn it on, it's going to listen to the conversation. It's going to transcribe this. It's going to send this to an external large language model, make sense of this, and then send that data back to me. And it does this on a daily basis. So at 8 o'clock each evening, it's providing that information. And I can decide what to keep, what to delete. So it has value to me, but it's definitely an inherent risk or an opportunity to organizations. And then the last thing, just to share as a quick tip, we have practically speaking in the title. Be aware that many of these agents have a thing that's called advanced voice mode. It's a way that
Hello,
you can
AI and
talk
marketing class.
to your device.
How's everyone doing?
And it can talk back to you. So one of the best use cases I've seen for this is one of the guys I follow is a programmer who is prevalent in the field of large language models and artificial intelligence. He walks his dog each evening, and he's talking to his phone through his earpods. And he's getting the system to create code for him that he later revises when he gets back to his home office. In a similar way, if you're driving to work, you can use these systems to talk to, they talk back to you. It's an incredibly productive use of the system. But again, it's an opportunity and it's a danger. The more convenient the use, the less we think about the downsides and ramifications.
Hello,
So anyway,
AI and
that
marketing
was me
class.
talking
How's everyone
super
doing this
fast
evening?
today. I think we have a few moments, Ed, for any questions that are coming up, and I am here to answer them.
Yes, as a matter of fact, and thank you so much for this information. You know, I was thinking about when you were talking about how there's devices now where it can record pretty much your entire life. You think about, okay, what about the other person on the other end? It's
Yes.
providing that information, and you don't know what nefarious things people will do. So just real quick, there was someone that asked a question about which AI model is best in handling and processing and analyzing numbers.
So that's a great question. So when we talk about numbers, large language models are not good at processing numbers. The nature of how they operate is they are predictive with the addition of some randomness. So essentially, a large language model is a prediction machine. You put in a query, and it predicts what is the probable response to that query, but it adds randomness to that. Mathematics is a discrete science in which we don't want randomness. So a large language model is not the right thing to do there. It might be useful at providing analysis of larger things, but that's typically not something that you want to use. So here we're getting into the field of machine learning and sort of, regular sort of systems. So that's the simple response to that particular question.
Mhm. And also too, and you kind of touched on this earlier, and you being a professor, I'm sure this question can relate. You can relate to this question, especially in the academic side. Should we be expecting that most things are written by AI at this point? This person says that they are, I believe they're in the HR field here, that they get a lot of job candidates that are using AI for the writing samples. Is there a trick to determine if AI was used? Also, too, if the writing sample is no longer a viable means of teasing out a knowledge base and skill set. So I'm figuring too, Professor Moore, you've had to deal with those type of things.
So this is a great question, and this is the problem that many who teach are grappling with at the moment. So these models are getting more sophisticated. You can train them to write in your own style. You can give them data, and you could push out 1,000 cover letters in a matter of minutes that are designed for particular sort of recipients. So as educators, the fear we have is our students are not doing the work, that they're using, ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini to write essays, to write discussion posts. Is there a way of detecting this? And the problem is, at the moment, there isn't a way that does this forensically. So if you look at the responses you get, these things, as I said, are written probabilistically, and there are certain words or phrases that appear more commonly. So one of them is the word delve. Delve will appear in results in a greater degree than it would do from sort of human-generated content. There are systems that can look at outputs and make a sort of a calculation as to how much of this may be generated by AI. But this process is probabilistic. It's not forensic. So as an educator, I recommend to my colleagues, don't use these systems because they can't verify that something is AI generated. They also have false positives and they'll get things wrong. So really, you've got to operate on the trust your gut or assume that everything is created by AI. The addendum to that is in California, there was a law that was written in about a year ago that will become law in January of 2026. I think it's called SB 104 or 504. But essentially it says anything that is AI generated needs to be watermarked. So there are some providers that watermark their content. So Gemini, Google's large language model, does this at the moment through a process called SynthID. And what it does is behind the scenes, the calculation of what's the next probable word to do is subtly influenced to create markers. And those markers allow us to detect AI-generated content. This has been open sourced, and there are other providers of services who are doing it. But to be honest, most large language model providers aren't going to do this unless there's a law that says they do have to do it. So the short answer to that fundamental question is, I work on the assumption, yes, anything I'm getting is probably being manipulated in some respect by AI. But maybe that's okay. That's the new reality. It's built into all of the tools. We look for different signifiers, different mechanisms to work out the validity of something. But anyway, that's my perspective.
Okay, another question, and it just kind of goes back to the always on recording situation. This person mentions that it actually may seem useful for coaching, especially in athletics and such. And this person's saying that they're thinking of a tennis coach who observes their pupil and suggests changes to improve their game. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, definitely. So I think these are really, positive tools, but it's the context in which you use them. So if you think about that coaching example, yes, you're recording the participant who's an athlete, but who else is in the frame as that happens? What other voices are being captured? And did they, provide, um, did they say, yes, you could do that? So that's the problem. Like any technology that has convenience, we start to use it without thinking about the unintended, consequences. An example is the car. It's a great thing. It gets us from A to B very quickly. It's transformed the US. We have new companies built on top of the fact that we have cars, but we also have a tremendous amount of people who are injured or killed every day by cars. Society hopefully sort of works out what is the appropriate sort of balance in use. I am a positive thinker, and my view is, on the whole, these tools are going to be to our benefit, but it gets down to education. It gets down to people understanding how they operate, who owns them, is there any sort of exchange of money? And then we can think about how to sort of incorporate them in our daily use.
Yeah, it's so wild. I'm sure many of people in our audience remember the Netflix show Black Mirror, and
Oh,
all
yes.
this stuff is just coming bubbling up to my mind here, thinking it's here, it's here, it's here. The next question here is: are there any risk, or is there a risk assessment tool that you would recommend for AI tools?
So that's complicated. If we go back to the various audit sites that I recommended, that's where I would start. So this one here, holistic evaluation of language models, that's a good place to start. I didn't put it in the slides, but what I'll do is I'll send this to Ed later today. Stanford has basically an AI risk repository. So what it's done is it's charted various dangers of using AI. So it's not a tool that audits, but it's a tool that provides you or your employees with an understanding of what are the potential risks. But the thing is, things are changing very rapidly. Experts in this environment are still unaware of some of the things that are transpiring. So if you think back 20 years ago and you think about security risk, it was a more constrained environment. We knew what we should anticipate. Here, the risks are far wider, and it's sometimes difficult to get our heads around that. But like I say, I will share that resource with the group.
And let's see, we're good for one more question. Actually, I really enjoy this question here. Are there any good sources? You were talking about sources a little earlier, like YouTube videos that you can recommend to show really the audience more examples of AI use in daily matters. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So it depends on who you are. So if you're an educator or someone who's looking to sort of get deeply ingrained in AI, there's a professor called Ethan Mollick, and he wrote a book recently about AI use. He's a really good guy to follow. Then there's actually, there's what we have, the AI Institute at DePaul. That would be a fantastic sort of resource to follow. And we're putting on a ton of great events. But what I'll do is I'll send Ed again a follow-up with some of my sort of favored resources. And that will give you an idea of what can be helpful.
Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to do our last. There's someone, James Hartley, would like to say a few words here. James, we're going to turn the mic over to you, if possible,
Okay.
here.
Q&A from this content. So, yeah.
All right, James, are you there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I must have accidentally hit a button. I hadn't expected to say anything. I'm sorry.
Oh, so no questions or any? Well, what did you think
No.
about the presentation?
I thought the presentation was great. There's a lot of great stuff in here. I'm going to have to go back, and our company is looking into AI extensively as well. And it's just like the professor provided all sorts of great resources that I can go leverage. We actually have access to the Google models and use the Google models ourselves, but I like the insight he provided on the dangers and the steps necessary to bring it into an organization in a structured manner. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Well, thank you
James.
so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour. Professor Moore, thank you so much for all the great things you provided, because this is clearly a very exciting topic. Also, sometimes in some cases, very scary. But as technology presses on, we'll move on, and to have somebody of your stature in this field just makes things much more palatable. So, any final words before we sign off on your end?
Yeah. So, Ed, thank you to you and your colleagues for providing this today. I'd like to sort of say to everyone on the call, think of DePaul as being your partner. We are embedded in Chicago. If you look at alumni working in the Chicagoland area, I think DePaul has the most. And we feel deeply about the future of this city, this state, and beyond. So we're your partners here. Ed and his colleagues are putting on these events. Please attend as many as you can, but reach out with your concerns, your needs, and I'm sure there's a way that we can work with you.
Well, again, thank you, Professor Moore, and it's a great segue to what you had mentioned. It's coming up in April. We have a wonderful series on inclusion and belonging, and really a perfect tie into what Professor Moore was talking about. On April 9th, we have AI in an inclusive world. We touched on that a little bit in our session with Professor Moore. Dr. Marty Martin will be talking about it. And so we definitely want you to go ahead, access this code, scan to register. We want you to be there, as well as for our other two sessions, Purpose and Impact in the Workplace by Dr. Veronica Appleton, as well as No Jerks Allowed, Building a Civilized and Inclusive Workplace Culture by Dr. Jacqueline Jensen. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Professor Moore, for demystifying the world of AI. And all of you, we'll see you in April.